Welcome and thanks for tuning in to the Victorian Aboriginal News Van Talks podcast. I'm your host, Charles Parkiner.
Victorian Aboriginal News acknowledges and pays respect to traditional owners and custodians across Australia. We acknowledge the elders who have gone before, those who currently lead their communities, and those who will follow in years and generations to come.
This podcast was made possible with support from the Community Broadcasting Foundation. Find out more at cbf.org.au.
In 2017, Gunditjmara woman Aunty Jill Gallagher took 18 months leave of absence from her position as the Chief Executive Officer of VATCHO, the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisations, to take the lead as Commissioner of the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commission. During that time, with a small and highly committed team, she established the Aboriginal electoral roll and oversaw the foundation of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, the organisation that has spearheaded Australia's first treaty legislation, which is now before the Victorian Parliament. She joins me today to reflect on the journey, the modern journey, to Victorian treaty. Aunty Jill, welcome back to the program.
Charles, thank you for inviting me back.
Aunty Jill, it's now a momentous time in Victorian history with that legislation that you never really thought would happen in your lifetime before Parliament. Let's take it back to the very beginning. So around about 2016, when the mob called out to the government, what we want most of all is treaty. This was at Federation Square. Tell us your recollections of that particular sequence of events.
Yeah, because back then and still today, the government has a strong self-determination agenda for First Peoples. And back then they actually wanted to hear from the mobs in Victoria, what does that look like? What does it mean? And as you've just stated, Charles, the mob said true self-determination is to be able to negotiate treaty for First Peoples. What was different about that was that we actually had a government that didn't just dismiss that call for treaty.
They acted pretty quickly, really, didn't they?
They did act very quickly, which surprised me immensely. I was shocked. But when I saw the media release that came out from Minister Hutchins, and one of my staff came running upstairs and said, Jill, you seen the media release? I said, what media release? And so I had a look at it and I thought, oh my Lord, the government are going to explore treaties for First Peoples in this state. So I then said to myself and said to my colleague at the time, I need to be involved in this somehow.
So were you involved in that early treaty working group that was established by the state government?
Yes, because the then Minister, Natalie Hutchins, put out an expression of interest for Aboriginal people to come onto a working group because we didn't know who are they going to talk to.
Yeah.
Or what mechanism are they going to have to be able to negotiate with? And so the working group, the very original working group, the government put out the expression of interest and I applied as an independent because they had criteria. You remember the criteria around whether you represent peak bodies or whether you represent mobs, clans, whatever. But I put in under an independent and I got on.
So who else was on there? I know Aunty Janine Coombs was on there.
Aunty Janine
Dan
Coombs,
Turnbull, I think.
Dan Turnbull, Michael Harding.
Yeah.
Aunty Eleanor Burke.
Oh, wow. This was a who's who of mob around Victoria.
There was a lot more people on there. It was just amazing to have that leadership.
And what was the focus of that work?
The focus of the work was to actually, now that we have a government that is willing to explore this, we need to have something that government can talk to.
Yeah.
Is that individual clan-based treaties? Do they go out and talk to every black fella in Victoria? Or what mechanism?
And sorry, this was actually before the legislation came out in 2018, wasn't it?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So part of our mandate was to develop that piece of legislation.
Gotcha. So what was involved in that? Because the legislation itself didn't really talk about what sort of treaties we'd get. That was left up to the First Peoples Assembly, of course, as we know. But a lot of the fundamentals of that legislation, I would assume, such as the key requirements, which were of course, to set up a self-determination fund, the Treaty Authority. What else was put forward by the Treaty Working Group to the government? What were some of the key initiatives that you worked on?
Some of the key initiative was that piece of legislation.
Yeah.
Now, the whole working group couldn't be involved, so we had to set up a legislation working group. And what surprised me about that piece of work, now I wasn't a lead gig in that, it was Mick Harding. Mick Harding, he took the lead in that. And another, I'm just going to try and remember his name, but was to get that piece of legislation to set up the framework to go forward.
Yeah.
Like you've just outlined, the Treaty Authority and the list goes on. But we needed that piece of legislation to go in there. But what was unusual about that process that I have always remembered, I don't know whether you're familiar, Charles, with how government develop legislation.
As a matter of fact, I'm quite ignorant of that, Art.
Okay. I'm not the expert, but it's my understanding government themselves will develop an exposure draft.
Oh, okay.
And that goes out for consultation. And that's where community have a say in when it's an exposure draft.
Right.
But in this process, the state government agreed for the working group to be part of developing the exposure draft.
And that, I think, was obviously fairly unique.
It was very unique.
Right.
Very unique. So they can do it when they want it, eh? Yeah.
It's amazing what government can do when they put their minds to it.
Yeah. Now, and that was the first thing we needed to do was to develop that piece of legislation. So we did that. And then that set the scene for the ongoing work of the working group. The working group then realised that we didn't, because we weren't an entity in our own right.
Yeah, I remember
We
that.
couldn't have a bank account or anything like that. Not that we wanted one, by the way. But we did need to have some self-determined funding and not just rely on government saying, well, we need to do this, here's the funding.
Yeah.
So the working group decided with the minister, well, the minister was the key in this, the Treaty Advancement Commissioner role was the next thing we needed.
And this is where you come in. So in
Yes.
2017, later that year, obviously the government comes to you and says, here it is, so you're going to take it. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, that's not how it happened, actually.
Well,
But
then-
isn't that interesting? How it happened was, first of all, the working group was still the working group.
Yeah.
It really didn't have any authority and really didn't have any budget, right?
Sure.
So we're just relying cap in hand. But what we did decide to do is structure ourselves. So we needed co-chairs because we didn't even have that. And so the co-chairs, which was Michael Harding and myself, right? So we became the co-chairs. So the co-chairs then pushed with the minister to this treaty commissioner role.
So this was your initiative.
No, it wasn't ours. It was actually the government's initiative,
Right.
by the way. I do need to be honest there. I'd like to make claim to that, by the way. It wasn't our initiative. At the time, the working group thought to ourselves, well, why do we need a commissioner, right?
Yeah.
But Natalie Hutchins, who was the minister of the day, basically she knew that we needed to have a commissioner which had authority,
Yeah.
which had a budget
Gotcha.
to advance it. When she convinced us, that's when we said, oh, now we see. So we actually then ran with that. So the government then put out, they advertised the role.
So expressions of interest.
Yeah, they advertised the role and I debated whether to throw my hat in the ring. And I thought,
Was it a tough decision to make? Because it means you'd be going away from VATCHO, which you've lived and breathed for so long, even up until that point.
it was a tough decision and it was a new ground. I was very, very scared, by the way. It hadn't been done before in this country.
Yeah.
So there was no template.
So what made you do it? What was the exciting hooks?
The exciting hooks was we could achieve something here.
Yeah.
You got to have a go. You got to have a go. And the fire in my belly was there and I wanted to have a go. And even if I wasn't successful, I was still going to have a go and help whoever got the role. But I was successful. I got it. There were other people who applied for it and we don't need to go down that.
No, but what was the brief from the government to you?
Well, first of all, the Treaty Advancement Commissioner, I was appointed by the governor.
Right.
I wasn't appointed by government.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So you're a legitimate commissioner.
I was a legitimate commissioner that had powers, and my report had to go to the governor, who is the Crown's representative, as we all know.
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought that was a bit of power in itself, right? That no minister appointed me. And I forget the name of the document that I had to sign, the
Letters patent?
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. And the powers that were outlined in that were quite significant. And so our mandate back then, the government thought that, well, once we had the commissioner role in place, we don't need the working group. But I said, no, we do. We really do. The working group is crucial to making sure I get it right.
So you're overseers almost.
Basically.
Yeah.
So apart from the community themselves going out to community.
Goes without saying.
But the working group was like my testing ground. If we came up with ideas, I'd test that with the working group. What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think it's a good idea? Working group would say yes or no, or maybe we need to tweak this. So they were crucial to the success of the commissioner role.
Your key objectives, though, seem to be the establishment of the Aboriginal electoral roll itself, and then subsequent to that, getting people to nominate for the Assembly, which was, I know, a really tough gig for you.
My key deliverable was not actually setting up a electoral.
Oh, okay.
No. My key deliverable was setting up a mechanism, designing and implementing a mechanism that government could talk to.
Essentially what's now the Assembly.
Essentially, which is now the First People's Assembly of Victoria.
But in order to get there...
Well, I had to work out how to get there. And some of the challenges that came with that, I have to say, some of the highly stressful challenges, and you raised it earlier on before we started the podcast, there was a number of issues. First of all, how do we get this body? Is it through an election process? Is it through the existing, back then there was only 12 recognised registered traditional owner groups? Or what other mechanism could we use to get this mechanism in place? So that was the question we had to answer. The other question that was very highly volatile was, well, what do we do with Aboriginal people that aren't traditionally or culturally from this place?
Yes.
That we now call Victoria.
And you and I have yarned about this many times over the years.
So that was a humongous questions that needed to be answered.
So just on that one, Art, if you wouldn't mind, just belabouring that for a minute. So the conversations that you would have had with the Treaty Working Group on non-Victorian First Peoples, what were some of the challenges that you and the working group identified there?
A lot of the challenges were, look, when you talk treaty, a treaty is a contract between two sovereign entities.
Yeah.
Okay. So we need to be very clear about that. And if you're an Aboriginal, a First Nations person who's not from what we now know as Victoria or any lands in Victoria, what role is that? And I didn't come up with the answer, but we had multiple discussions with the working group. And then we took the question out to also the community. What do we do? And what came back was that Aboriginal people that come from other areas within Australia should be part of the elections. And I'll come back to those elections in a minute.
Sure.
Should be part of the election so they can enrol, they can vote, but they can't sit around the table and decide on treaties.
Correct. Sure.
Okay, so that's what came back from the mob.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's pretty good. But the other thing that was added, but anything that comes out of treaty, all Aboriginal people that are living on those lands should benefit from that.
And that's embraced within the statewide treaty process right now, of course. So that's lived true.
Yes.
So the Aboriginal electoral roll.
Okay. So the other question for me and the working group was, how do we get this mechanism? Do I just appoint?
Which is always a dangerous thing to do.
Of course it is. So I couldn't answer that, and neither could the working group. We had many conversations, but we took that out to asking community, what is there? And we actually called Aboriginal people from all across Victoria together to be part of what do you call it? Like a parliament's not the right word.
A gathering.
Anyway, let's call it a gathering. We focused on elders, we focused on youth, we focused on people in the middle.
I remember that.
And across Victoria. And one of the questions we wanted them to answer for me was, how do we get the people on this mechanism? And a resounding result was, can only do it through an election process.
Yeah.
But not through the existing electoral roll.
Exactly, which is why the Aboriginal electoral roll is not reported back to the State Electoral Commission or the Federal Electoral Commission. A big message that's always out there. But then to go and get an electoral roll, oh my God, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, to get an electoral roll was quite easy, but to carve up Victoria into electoral boundaries,
yeah, of course,
was a nightmare, Charles, I'm telling you. But when the community answered that question, they basically gave us some other nuggets.
Right.
And those nuggets were the voting age has to be 16 and up.
Yep.
Which even mainstream voters are saying it should be 16 and up. But anyways, and if we are carving up the state of Victoria into Aboriginal electoral boundaries, don't carve up or split in half existing traditional owner groups.
Of course.
Yeah. So, and try to stick as much as possible to traditional boundaries where you can. Anyway, so we came up with the electoral boundaries. We came up with, we had to convince mob that in no way is it connected to mainstream electoral commission.
Yep.
Because we had a lot of our mob who've never voted in their life and didn't want to, of course, and didn't want to get fines.
Of course.
Yeah, okay. But the community soon told us that's what we needed to do, and I thought that was amazing.
But you then went about travelling right across the state. You were speaking to mobs. You went and visited pretty well every prison in the state?
Every prison in Victoria.
To ensure that everyone heard about it. Because you weren't just getting people to come onto the electoral roll. It was yarning up, this is what treaty could be. This is what it could be for you. This is what it could be for us.
Yes.
And I remember, and this is what always struck me, Aunt, is that as I was trailing you around as the treaty correspondent at that point in time, I was always stunned by the number of events where it wasn't mob. You were out there promoting this to non-mob.
Oh, very much so.
And that was just so well taken on board.
And by the way, mob in prisons could vote.
Yeah.
They just couldn't run.
Yeah.
I just needed to say that. So there was...
Be a bit difficult for them to get out to assembly chamber meetings.
Yes. There was voting booths in each of the prisons.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyways, was a humongous task to think in 18 months, or less than 18 months, we actually had a fully elected, fully operational First Peoples Assembly, and given that our clans, our mobs copped the brunt of colonisation and all the hurt and all the damage that done to our traditional boundaries, to our, you know what I mean?
As we've seen in Europe, for goodness sake. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. It was a humongous task, and sometimes I almost quit.
I remember you being very frustrated at times.
I was a lone commissioner.
Tell me about some of the challenges you had. Now, you and I, before you answer that, we've talked about the challenges from mob before, and that's out there. I want to hear about some of the other challenges from government, because they must have existed, for goodness sake.
They certainly did. And I'll talk about a couple.
No names, no pack drill, by the way.
No, I won't dob anyone in. But, you know, the government system is a big system.
Yeah.
And they were learning also, by the way, to give credit where credit's due. But the frustration I had with government was, for example, when we first opened the electoral roll and we're encouraging people to enrol and blah, 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 the government's expectation that would have 70,000 Aboriginal people enrolled,
God, yes.
you know?
Yeah.
I mean, all the time they kept on saying, nah, 2,000's not enough, nah, 5,000's not enough, or whatever the number was. And I'm thinking, well, hang on. It's got to grow.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just expect people to rock up if they've never voted before. It's going to take time for people to feel safe and trust.
And it's still a work in progress.
And it's still a work in progress, even today, you know. But it's a lot better today.
Oh, absolutely.
But the expectation from government was that everyone signs up or, you know.
Do you think they were scared about the potential negative backlash from the Conservatives and Conservative media? Because that's happened, and we saw that.
Yes, I agree. And it probably was.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, and I don't know, but surely there's documents floating around somewhere in the archives when Victoria first opened their electoral roll.
I'm sure it took a while.
And theirs is compulsory, ours isn't.
Yeah.
So it makes a difference.
Of course.
Anyways, so frustrations like that, the expectations.
But how did that play out, those frustrations? I mean, I can imagine people just calling you saying, come on, you've got to get another 5,000. You've got to get another couple of thousand. Yeah. How did that actually work out?
Well, how it played out was the then head of DPC, the secretary, I can't remember the person's name, thank God.
We're not mentioning names.
Yeah, we're not mentioning names. Would call a meeting with me as a commissioner and ask why.
Oh, good Lord.
You know? And so I would bite my tongue, keep calm, and go to the meeting and be very polite. And say, yes, we're working on that. We realise that. Yes, yes. But the other frustration was, I don't know whether I've ever told you this story, Charles, but it was in the middle of, we hadn't established the final design of the assembly at this stage.
Right.
And I had a change of EAs. Now, earlier on, I spoke about how I was totally independent of government, but my staff weren't.
Because you had people seconded from the government to work at the commission. I remember that, of course, yeah.
And they were still public servants.
Yes.
So none of my files that I had on my computer could ever be
seen by the government.
Or someone who does a, what do you call that, where you can apply to have access to files?
Freedom of information.
Freedom of information.
Right, so it couldn't be accessed under FOI.
But my staff were not because they were public servants. So that was another frustration, but it never became an issue, by the way, but potentially it could have been. But I was in the middle. My EA had resigned and went and got another fantastic job, and one of these days I'm going to go crook at her. No, I won't. She's a lovely person, beautiful person. And so I had to recruit a new executive assistant. But we were forced to use the government's, and I won't mention their name either, the government's consultancy firm.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Recruitment consultancy firm to do the recruitment for us. So they did. And of course they did all the checks and everything else that you do and referee
They filtered
checks.
them essentially.
Filtered them, that's exactly right. And so my staff had 4 applications sent to us.
Yeah.
And they said, Jill, you don't need to be on the interview panel. And I thought, okay, all right, I won't. I didn't care, by the way, but I should have been. In hindsight, that was a bad decision on my part. And we recruited a lovely young lady.
Aunty Jill, tell us a bit about this person that you did employ and what you discovered as a result. Once again, no names.
Well, after being about 4 to 5 weeks in my office, one of my staff Googled this person's name. She rang me up 9 o'clock at night, crying and very distressed. And she said, Jill, Google. So I did. And I was horrified at what I found.
What did you discover?
This woman and her husband were heavily involved in the white supremacy group.
Now, this person who was there as your EA for over a month had access to your personal files.
My personal files.
To all your contacts.
All my contacts, everything that we were doing to design and develop First People's Assembly of Victoria.
Was there any inkling, and we're not going to dive too much into this person, but it does talk about the dangers of our society when it comes to achieving degrees of self-determination. There are always people working against us, without a shadow of a doubt. But were there any signs that this was a potential problem of this person in that month or so you had them with you?
No. The loveliest person.
What was the result? So you had a call from the staff member that night.
Yeah.
What happened
The next
9
morning,
o'clock the next morning?
Next morning, that person's employment was terminated.
Right. What was your reaction to the government? Because the government was the one that you said had been responsible for feeding those applications through to you via their recruitment agency.
Yes.
No names again.
Yeah. Their response to me, because I actually wanted to go public with this, Charles, I actually thought it was important enough to know that we have elements in society that don't want to see Aboriginal people advance.
Yeah.
And we still have today.
Oh, God,
but
yes.
I wanted to go public with it. The government basically said no under no circumstances. And I know I had powers, I could have, but then I would have pissed off one of the key partners in treaty.
Yeah. So let's jump over there and then to the election itself. Mm-hmm. So how did it feel to actually – I know it's an easy question. It's a cop-out question to ask, how did you feel? But what was the sense you carried with you when you actually saw the opening of the polling for the First People's Assembly of Victoria?
I thought, this is amazing. We've actually – I couldn't believe it, but it's not all down to me either. I had some amazing staff.
I know you did.
Both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff, just brilliant.
And a couple of them still at the Assembly, mind you.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
And the fact that we actually, from scratch, designed and developed an electoral process for First Nations people in this state.
And look what it's achieved.
And look what it's achieved. It's amazing to think we have a treaty bill in Parliament waiting to be debated.
Now, I've asked you this before. I've challenged you with this before. I remember on more than one occasion you would be speaking to community and you would say, and you know what I'm going to say now, don't you? I do not believe that I will see treaty in my lifetime, but it's something for which I will always support. It's well within your lifetime, all right, legislation is going to be passed.
Yep. Well, I
Surprised?
can I say, Charles, I'm very surprised because in the first treaty bill that we put through Parliament was the mechanism to the design principles of the mechanism to set up the First Peoples. I knew the First People's Assembly had a big task because they also,
Oh, it's huge.
you know, I mean, I was one person, but here you've got an elected body of people who their communities have elected and have put in trust and faith that they will do the right thing by our culture and by our peoples.
And they were insanely amazing people. I mean, led by Marcus Stewart from Tungarung, Aunty Geraldine Atkinson, just amazing people, and many of them still on the Assembly right now. When the Assembly was set up, do you think that the Assembly members had any idea of the body of work that was going to be thrust upon them?
I don't believe so.
Otherwise they wouldn't have
Otherwise
nominated.
they wouldn't have put up their hand. I mean, I didn't, when I first embarked as a commissioner for treaty, setting up First People's Assembly, I had no idea on the amount of work. I had no idea. And I naively thought every mob is going to be behind me 100%.
It was not the case.
It was not the case. How stupid. But anyways, the First People's Assembly, the first election, then the second elections, they've all done amazing work because it's not easy in that chamber.
No,
It's not easy to get. I mean, people think because we're black, we all think alike and we all greet with one another.
Oh, God, we heard that too many times in 2023, didn't we?
Haven't we? I mean, that's not the case. And they managed, unlike the politicians, they managed to keep their debates private.
It's interesting, actually, and this will be the second last question that I ask of you, Aunty Jill, but given that amazing body of work that was developed, I mean, the self-determination front, the treaty negotiation framework, and then, of course, now the bill, the legislation that's going before Parliament, do you believe that without cultural guidance, without cultural protocols, that body of work could have been achieved?
No, you needed both.
Yeah.
You needed cultural guidance and you also needed, how can I put this, a modern world view.
Walking on two sides of the line.
You needed both. There's
Yeah.
no way could we go back to establishing clan-based approaches, even though we're there.
Yeah.
We're getting there here in Victoria through the Traditional Owner Settlement Act, and that's amazing. Even now, we've had the numbers on the First Peoples Assembly increase due to the work of the Traditional Owner Settlement Act.
Yeah.
And new members coming on board, I think, is really good. But no, you needed both. We can't go back and undo what's been done, so we have to also work and operate in a modern world. But we also still needed that strong connection to culture and cultural guidance.
So now for the last question, Aunty Jill. It's a question I asked you many times since 2018 when I first started trailing you as a journalist on treaty. What are your aspirations ultimately for treaty?
What are my aspirations?
Personal aspirations.
Personal aspirations for treaty. My personal aspirations for treaty is that Aboriginal families can, one, hold their head up high, that they belong to one of the oldest living cultures on the planet, that all Victorian or Australian citizens can do the same.
Absolutely.
When they go overseas, they can say to the Egyptians and to the Greeks, we have an ancient culture in our country too.
Yeah.
The amazing First Peoples of this country, and talk about the culture. That's my aspirations for treaty, is our true place in society and our true acknowledgement of our ancient history.
Aunty Jill Gallagher, thank you for your time and the reflections.
Thank you, Charles.
For a full transcript of this interview, visit the Victorian Aboriginal News website at vicaboriginalnews.com.au. Until our next episode, stay safe and stay informed.